You mentioned the Deshaun Watson situation. Let me just say a couple of things about that. And I want to bounce something off of you that I mentioned to Sims yesterday. Number one, I still would be very upset if I was a Texans fan just because of where we currently are. Regardless of how we got here, a lot of different events have come together to get us to this point, both as it relates to Watson becoming alienated with the team. That never should have happened. Whatever was said or done to make Watson not want to play for the Texans, that was the first thing. Then the off-field issues for which Watson bears some degree of responsibility, civil and or criminal and or at a minimum moral and or just stupidity. That has created a situation that makes it untenable for him to play. And they won't trade him for anything less than what it is they want. So he's there and they're paying him. And he's a constant reminder of what you could have. And yes, it would have been a different game last night if Deshaun Watson is playing quarterback instead of Davis Mills. All of these things would come together if I was a Texans fan and just torment me. And the fact that he's still on the roster makes it worse. So I'm balancing whatever optimism I try to find in the current circumstances against the fact that how in the world did we get to this point in a year where all of these things have come together and put us in a spot where we've got a franchise quarterback to whom we're paying a franchise quarterback salary and we can't use him?
Well, I'm reminded of a statement that I'm sure I've made on this show 68 times. But Bill Parcells used to always say this. He drove me crazy. He said it. I covered him for 4 years. Once a week, he would say, they don't sell insurance for that kind of stuff. In other words, his whole point was something weird would come up in football.
Yeah.
And look, Cal McNair bears responsibility for what he said to Deshaun Watson and then how he acted after what he said to Deshaun Watson about the future, about the hire, about the fire, all that stuff, okay? However, none of this would have happened if Deshaun Watson, quite honestly, had behaved. So, allegedly, if he had behaved, okay?
Well, I think it's fair to say. I think it's fair to say he created these situations. We've heard enough from his lawyer to say this guy did some things that he shouldn't have done. His lawyer's already admitted that some of these massage therapy sessions turned into consensual activities, sexual activities. So it's on his radar screen for these interactions. And it meshes with the allegations that some of the people are making because 22 of them, allegedly, weren't interested, and he didn't stop. So, yeah, his behavior is a big part of this. And it's just another factor that just these weird, the way the dominoes have fallen. It's just a strange, unprecedented situation, and here we are. He's still on the payroll. He's still on the team.
And by the way,
he's not playing.
And by the way, are we sure that it's going to stop at 22? Are we sure there aren't more? I don't say that with knowledge. I just say that there's a reason why this is such a morass. Okay, and that is because there's so much now that we don't know and so much that has not yet been established factually. And so that's why, to me, when Nick Caserio basically leaks it out, hey, we're open for business with Deshaun Watson. If you're Howie Roseman in Philadelphia, you're Chris Greer in Miami, you're Scott Fitterer in Carolina, you're any number of teams, of general managers that are interested in Deshaun Watson, and all of those teams are, if you're one of those teams, how can you give your best possible offer? And so that's why we are where we are right now, Mike. That's why the headache known as Deshaun Watson, in some ways, he's one of the luckiest men in the world right now because he's getting $10 million when arguably if you were, how many employers in America right now would pay an employee who wasn't working, who had this incredible legal sword of Damocles over his head. And every week he's getting, what is it, Mike, 1/37th of $10 million? Is that they're paid in 37 increments now? 37 weekly increments? I think that's
You're right. You're right.
It used to be 17 weekly increments, but now they have made it so that it very good for the players, by the way, that they pay them, in like over a 9-month period instead of over like a 4-month period. But be that as it may, I think he's pretty fortunate that he's, his body is he's able to work out, he's able to do whatever he does, and he's getting paid $10 million to sit on the sidelines and watch football.
And the Texans are willing to do it because they view that money as the investment toward whatever they're inevitably going to get for Deshaun Watson, that they're going to hold firm with their demands. Right. And in their mind, and look, teams have done their investigation. And I think that there's a level of confidence that at the end of the day, this guy's not going to prison. Now, he may end up pleading guilty to misdemeanor charges. He may end up writing some significant checks. And if that is what gives the individuals whose rights were diminished in some way, who were harmed in some way, if that gives them their form of justice, so be it. That happens all the time. But there's a belief that the worst case scenario is extremely unlikely, and that's one of the reasons why the Texans are holding firm. They're not going to reduce their price because they believe the worst case scenario is extremely unlikely. But until it's done, you never know what's going to happen because, yes, you could have an indictment. Yes, you could have a prosecution. Yes, you could have a trial that becomes a comedy of errors for the defense, and the next thing you know, he is convicted. That could happen. My understanding, Peter, and this is the last point I want to make, because we're talking Texans. I don't know how much we're going to be talking Texans as a football team over the balance of the year. We're not going to have them in prime time again, I don't think. And I hope not, frankly, but unless Tyrod Taylor's back. But I made the argument yesterday that the Dolphins, who clearly want him, Stephen Ross wants Deshaun Watson. And the Dolphins are hesitating, not because of the possibility that the moment they trade for him, the league says, oh, wait, we've yet to decide whether or not he's going to be put on paid leave because we haven't had to. The Texans have done that for us. We're going to put him on paid leave. They're not worried about that. They're worried about the price. And I think from Stephen Ross's perspective, because he comes to it with a different mindset, different background than the people who are caught up in the nuts and bolts of the value of picks and what this pick's worth and what this pick's worth. And here's the chart. Look, all you got to do is look at last year. 3 first-round picks. Tua Tagovailoa, Austin Jackson, Noah Igbenogany. Would you give those 3 guys right now to the Texans for Deshaun Watson? Hell yes, you would. And then some. And that's where I think it takes someone like a Stephen Ross who can speak to Chris Greer and say, you got to quit acting like these unused draft picks are Hall of Famers. Because they're not. In our experience, they're not Hall of Famers. So if the Texans want this, and this, if they want a bunch of unscratched off lottery tickets, because we know what happens when we scratch them off, give them to them. And then we get a guy who is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And I just can't help but wonder whether or not the Tua Tagovailoa rib injury is the impetus, Chris or Peter. I'm so used to saying Chris. Now I can throw in Mike Golick as well. Peter is the impetus for Stephen Ross to just tell Chris Greer, go get it done.
Look, Mike, it's very clear. This began back when Stephen Ross basically bought this franchise, a decade ago or however long ago it was. He made it very clear internally, and people who have worked for Stephen Ross have basically, known the whole time that they were there, I want my Marino. And those are not exact quotes at all. That's not a quote. But it was clear that Stephen Ross didn't care how you got it, how many players you had to trade. The only thing, he was consumed with it. I want a franchise quarterback. And, okay, so now, and again, it's early, but it's getting late early also. It appears that they made a colossal error when they picked Tua Tagovailoa over Justin Herbert. All right? So now, even though I believe that Chris Grier and Brian Flores have done an excellent job in building this roster so far, they've got one Achilles heel, that they've built this roster and they've had a lot of high draft choices, and they honestly have no idea that whether they have their quarterback of the future on the roster. And if they need to go get him, they are going to have to now spend almost all of the draft picks that they have accumulated, and maybe one or two more into the future of their own, to go get that quarterback. And Mike, you said one other thing about Deshaun Watson. I have talked to one person who's interested in Deshaun Watson in the NFL. This was a couple of months ago, and who basically put it this way. Look, if this stuff is true, this is Deshaun Watson's moment of truth. And he has to understand, he's smart enough to understand that I can't do this anymore. And he goes, everybody who knows this person thinks that Deshaun Watson is smart, and he is not going, if he understands this has to stop now, lying in the sand, that he's going to be able to do it. And that's why I think people are going to be willing to trade for a guy who's going to have to do a lot of public penance. You know, the only person in the last, say, 15 years, Mike, who has been similar, 15, 20 years, I think, who's been similar to this has been Michael Vick. Because when the Philadelphia Eagles signed Michael Vick after he got out of Leavenworth, they got killed in many segments of their fan base. There are fans in Philadelphia who are still angry that Andy Reid and Jeffrey Lurie went out on a limb for Michael Vick, even though Michael Vick was close to a perfect citizen the whole time he was in Philadelphia. I think this is going to be basically the same thing, other than the fact that Deshaun Watson's not going to be free. Deshaun Watson is going to cost a lot.
Yeah, and look, Ross wanted Joe Burrow last year before the draft. He wanted him badly. The Bengals would not give them the time of day. I'd still love to know what the Dolphins put on the table that the Bengals said no to. And then Ross pivoted to Tua. Ross wanted Tua as the fallback to Burrow, and he got what he wanted. Now he wants Deshaun Watson. The question is, at what point does he say, just give them what they want? Because there's a chance come March, if you're competing with other teams to get Deshaun Watson, and there will be other teams that have said, hey, we're done with our guy, let's get in this Deshaun Watson conversation. It could cost more come March than you could get him for as the trade deadline approaches.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.